First half of this video is day in the life startup stuff. Second half is a bunch of AI tips. Feel free to jump around in the chapters.
All right, today we're doing a little day in the life thing. If you're new here, I'm Parker X, and I've been working on startups for a decade. Dropped out of college to help my friend build a food delivery startup. We ended up exiting that company in 2021. I did a bunch of product management, product design, also was kind of like a quasi-engineering manager. When we sold the company, I said, I'm gonna start my own one for the first time. It didn't work. It was in the music space, really challenging. Did that for like a year and a half, but learned a ton. So on this channel, I share all of those stories, and I also share the last 2 years of my life, which was learning how to code. Because when the second one didn't work out that I was working on, I had a tough decision. Do I either go and join a big tech company and make day in the life videos about that and be a corpo slave forever? Or do I learn how to code? Something that I had struggled with literally since I was 18. I'm 31 now. And it took me until I was 29 to like go all in. It was different this time because we had ChatGPT, we had all these tools. So on this channel, I teach you all the stuff that I'm learning, how I'm learning it, how to get full stack, how to build everything that you want, and more. And without further ado, let's just get right into it. We have a lot to cover. So with what I'm building, it's called Map, and it's an all-in-one platform that's basically a future version of yourself. It's an AI model that's trained on everything that you want to get done, all of your goals, but it has a bunch of tools that are built into it. So think your Mac doc. Think of the calendar, the notes, the tasks, the project management, all this stuff that you use on a day-to-day basis, powered by your future self. Really hard project to build. And the last 8 weeks, and something you can take away from this, the lesson is not everything that you pursue you'll end up using in production, but it's still valuable because you learned about it. So about 8 weeks ago, I needed to build something that allowed me to deploy my app to all the users on our wait list. And I was gonna use Vercel. I was gonna use all this serverless stuff. But I got my first bill with just pretty much no users and did the math on it. I was like, I'm gonna bankrupt myself. And so that led me down this path because I've been traditionally in Next.js, TypeScript, ShadCN, React Dev. It's mostly front end, back end is a service style stuff. It led me to actually having to go and learn how to provision my own server and use DigitalOcean and VPSs, and I'm getting rained on, and some of the Linux stuff. And it actually isn't that hard. And I think that that's something that Peter Levels talks about, and even DHH, if you don't know him, he's from Basecamp, I made a video about him. But they talk about this phenomena that's going on in the tech industry where a lot of these services just exist because they scare you into thinking you need them. And so you go and you pay this monthly service for something that you could just go and learn. And there's literally specialists for these specific roles. So I can link a blog article that shows you everything about it, but in short, you can take a Next.js app, you can put it in a Docker container, which is not scary, it doesn't take much time at all, and it allows you to run that anywhere. And all it took was changing one line of code on the next config file, and then putting it on this thing and running this tool called Kamal, and it just goes. So it's just like Vercel, except for $5 a month, you can literally have the same exact functionality, and it'll scale up to infinite users. I mean, it's crazy. Like, literally, Peter Levels, he got Elon Musk to retweet his product, and it went from like $5 a month to like $300 a month. But if that same thing had happened with one of these features or one of these SaaS services out there, he would have been paying $35,000. So there's a big difference, and that's just something I wanted to bring together. And then also, on just tech in general, there's so many flashy frameworks. Like, I was gonna use this thing called Hono, and I went out and I was like, I need to work with Google Calendar and Outlook and Whoop and Aura and Strava and all these things. I'm gonna use this flashy framework that I saw a YouTube video about. But you don't realize that that YouTuber got paid to make the video, so then you go and you try to build the thing, and there's no documentation, there's no examples, and you can't have a lot of surface area to learn from. So find stuff that's like tried and true, that's used everywhere, and don't be afraid to learn, because it's worth it, and you'll have longevity in what you're learning. Now, I will say there's definitely a balance, because I almost got to the point where I wanted to just like rip every service out and raw dog everything, because I just wanted to learn it. But I'm still using Supabase, which is kind of like a backend as a service, Postgres. Also, it uses, like, it does my auth for social sign-on. But there's also a double-edged sword there, because they can launch a new update, or Next.js can do something new, and then your auth is going to be broken if you update. But today we're going to be working on basically stitching together this adapter pattern that I made. So with Google Calendar in particular, because we have this awesome calendar that's going to take on Google Calendar, we have wrapped every single resource that their API provides. So that is ACL, which is access control list. That is there's 6 or 7 different resources. There's ACL, there's events. So think of on your calendar, you have events. You have channels, which is the ability to subscribe to a channel or unsubscribe to a channel. It's like watching it to see if anything changes. So if you got a flight that's booked, then you'd get that email and that would show up on your calendar. We need to listen for that stuff. You also have colors. So think of the colors on the calendar. A lot of people color coordinate stuff. We need to pull those in. We have calendar lists and calendars. They're slightly different, but they all have their own kind of function signatures that we need to write. They have their own JSON that comes in. And then there's free busy to see if they're free or if they're not busy, and then there's settings. So we've built this kind of off-ramp for Google Calendar because there's billions of users that use it. They have it tuned in exactly like they like, and I don't want to make it this hard stop. I think other companies, hey.com has a calendar, and you have to kind of like have this like one-way door where like if you're going to come in and pay $30, like you can't expect two-way bidirectional syncing. I think that's kind of a bad way of approaching it. I want to be able to have everything synced, and I want to make sure that everything's good and people can bring in their settings. So today we've built out that adapter pattern, which I can show you in a second what it looks like. It has a Google Calendar client that authorizes every single call. It deals with the retrieval of the tokens and the storing of the tokens. On first sign up, it decides, do you have the tokens? Do you not have the tokens? Do you have any calendars signed up? And then it'll send you to a setup page where we then use a remote procedure call with Supabase that basically says, hey, these are all the things that we need. This is what the data looks like. Let's go get all of it. Let's serialize it in TypeScript. And then, you first serialize it in TypeScript using a server action called sync calendar. And then it calls out to this RPC called sync calendar, which is PSSQL. And that, in I think like 10 seconds, takes 36 months of data. Everything, literally everything that you've ever had in your calendar, securely brought over and stored in Supabase, which is amazing because not only do you get day one everything that you had in Google Calendar, but we can train on that. So future version of Parker wants to understand how past version of Parker spent his time. And the only way to do that, the only way to have a good understanding of what this footprint of the user is by having a ton of data. That's why you always see stuff in AI where it's like data is the mode, data is the mode, data is the mode. That's because it's really important. So we're going to be able to have this model that's trained on that 36 months of data. We're going to do the same exact thing for health data. Again, all this is going to be HIPAA compliant, all anonymous, you're going to be encrypted, all that good stuff. Like there's no security issues. And that allows us to provide a really awesome experience where, you can basically have this ideal self that you're communicating with every day. And I think that that's something you've never been able to do before. Like, to me, that's mind blowing. I think that people throughout their day, they have ups and downs. Like they're not just David Goggins all the time, like I'm a crazy disciplined person. But they might be a little sad, or they might lose motivation. It's fleeting. So by having MAP, the idea is that it's not this AI coach. I think that's super cringe. I think the positioning of that sucks. I don't think people want this thing like buzzing in their pocket if they think it's like, a leash or like somebody else. So a lot of what I'm working on is how do you make this feel like your future self? How do you make the application and the experience itself and the messaging and the packaging all feel really natural? And that's going to come down to getting all that information, like I said. So let's jump into some code. First, need another coffee. It might seem like I'm super caffeinated, but I was also up till like 3 last night getting all the back end stuff to work with the front end. Also, it just dawned on me that I yap a lot about certain things that you might have questions about. And in my last video, I got a bunch of really good questions, really good feedback about how to make the videos better. So 2 things that I ask. One, if you have any questions about what I'm yapping about, they don't have to be like always positive. Like if you want to hate on me too, I'm down for that. I'm open to feedback, but ask any questions. I always answer them. I try to be super helpful. If it's AI related, I have like literally just Apple Notes just filled with prompts because I'm a one-man shop and I have to do back-end, front-end, design, marketing, all this stuff. So I've been like turbocharged by using all this AI stuff literally since like the day that not even 3.5 came out. I started using GPT-2, which is really bad. But I've been using these things forever. So if you have any questions about this, please comment below. And then, of course, the classic YouTube thing, like it, because I checked those stats. And I was just telling my fiance, like, at 1 a.m. last night, I went and I had like 40 likes. And then I checked again and I had like 90. And I'm like, 40 people like actually clicked this button? Like, that's more people than I know. Like, that's insane. So yeah, it's crazy to me. Now we're going to switch cameras and we're going to go into the computer
like in Zoolander, we're going into the computer.
I know people like desk reviews, so this is the hub. I pulled out some of the old keyboards. I used to be a Magic keyboard guy, but I'm pretty tall, like 6'3", 6'5", blonde hair, blue eyes. No, but then I got this. This is a Moonlander. I'm not going to pull it out. There's a reason it's in here. It's collecting dust. It's too hard to use. But this Kinesis, this is it. Because you can have it split. If you're tall, if you have broad shoulders, you don't want to look like a shrimp and you'll hurt your back, literally. If you're working like 16-hour days, like I have been, like you cannot have a different keyboard. That's the best. Then I just have a wide camera. I have this Logitech 920. It's like a decent entry-level webcam. It actually has software where we can edit. We got the Canon ADD, which we're going to jump into in a sec. We've got the microphone to up the quality. And then it can go up and down, but I never use that. And then some lights. It's got like a little piece of paper on it.
Here's a quick demo of the product so you actually know what it's doing. So the homepage was a one-day view of what you have going on today, some tasks, the goals for the quarter, progress bars, pretty ugly. And then it had this AI gen thing where you could basically just put in what your goal was. So in this case, it was a fitness goal. So I'd write in, I want to run a marathon by August 30th, but it was really dumb. But it kind of nailed the initial idea. And then after that, I realized, okay, that's cool that it can generate that stuff, but we need to make it multi-agentic, which meant that it could take in the information, and if you didn't have enough information about the goal, it would ask you more questions. And I took this from a project called Morphic. So if you're curious how Perplexity works, when I type in, how do I make Cuban coffee? It's giving me sources. It's giving me an answer. It's giving me this summary. It's really good at summaries, by the way. And then it gives me this image here. It has to decide which image to serve. It has to have a function behind the scenes for this. There's a lot of stuff. It has to allow me to share, rewrite if I want to. So it's an additional call. And then it has this related section. And what I was doing there was I basically copied that pattern. So if I typed in Morphic, there's this awesome open source project. You should follow the founder or the guy who made it, Muriela, on Twitter. But you can see he open sourced it. So you can go download this code and you could just hit why is NVIDIA growing rapidly? And it's using the AI SDK and a bunch of stuff under the hood in order to do this. So you have, in my video, I kind of explained it. But in the second version, you have the query that comes in from the user. So it'd be, hey, I want to run a marathon. It's going to say, well, do we have enough information about that? And that's what the task manager is. It's a separate file. And then it would do an inquire. So that's the next kind of step. These are all separate files, right? And then it would give you the proposal. So the proposal would be basically what you saw in Perplexity, where it's like this kind of like plan for you. And then it would give you a preview of the plan across what it looks like on your calendar, what it looks like for the to-dos that you need to done. But again, it was kind of dumb. And so then I said, all right, well, if it's for health stuff, because that's a little bit more objective, let's bring in some data. And so that's when I said, all right, let's write a bunch of API wrappers for Whoop, because I wear a Whoop. And that's what this was. So then you have all this data that's streaming in. It was not done with webhooks. So that's the next step. But this would give you a better idea of the health picture, because it's like I was talking about earlier with context. Context matters. And so I had the sleep composition for the day, sleep duration, some style issues, heart rate across your workouts, and then individual workouts as well as individual sleeps. So again, a lot of stuff going on with live data and making it look good. And then behind the scenes, there's this little like journal that was getting created. So LLMs are really good at reading human text, like stuff that sounds like someone wrote it because it was trained on the internet. You'll notice it's like worse at numbers when it comes to like working in Excel and stuff. So it's getting better, obviously, but that's what this was. And then after that, I also realized, well, it needs, you know, that kind of flow. So if I wanted to complete that marathon in the next 90 days, well, what specific information are you seeking to complete? You know, this is kind of a test to see like, what would you need to know? But it's kind of annoying too. So I didn't really like this, but obviously learned a lot. And then it would create that training plan and it would spit out a JSON blob, basically. So this would be what you would use then to create the calendar events, create the to-dos and all of that. Like, hey, do you need to get shoes? Then I realized you actually need to have all your events from your original calendar, like I was talking about earlier. So then I added this sync map calendar. And then when you do that, it would take a few seconds. And then it'd say, okay, cool, you've synced. And then all of them were on the calendar. So this is all pretty simple. But it gets into my next topic about how to learn, right? So if you're having trouble with a certain concept, this is a good transition. I've had trouble learning how to get drag and drop to work like Google Calendar, where you can just go like this and you can go across and you can go left, you can go right, you can drag from the bottom, you can drag from the bottom on actual events. And so in the case of this part here, it like looks all fine and dandy, but then getting it from this step to the next step takes a lot. So that's where, pro tip, you'll want to use something like V0. Now I use Cursor as my IDE, and we'll get into that in a second. I made a couple of videos about it, and you'll really want to take notes on some of the stuff that I learned about it because I've used it for over a year, basically since it came out. But if you're trying to learn a new concept, something I've found really helpful, I was literally doing this yesterday because I've gotten drag and drop to work, right? But I don't understand it that well. And you want to be competent. You want to know it like the back of your hand. So something I've asked the V0 here, and why I choose V0 is because it's framework specific. Like it's trained on exactly what I want. It's not outdated. It's put out by the company that does Next.js. But I say, hey, like I'm still having trouble. Like, can you explain exactly like why I would use React hooks versus server actions? So it gives me a bunch of examples. And then I get into the specifics of my project. Then I say, all right, well, can you actually help me kind of understand like drag and drop? Like we'd probably use drag and drop for hooks, right? And then it explains it, gives me examples, and it actually starts to build one. So then when I have a confusing topic that I mean, there's a bug here, obviously. I could say there's a bug. But when I have a confusing concept in my head, I go to these LLMs as tutors. I ask them a lot of questions, and the biggest part, literally, the biggest part of all of this is like actually read the stuff that your LLMs give you. Do not be the idiot or me like a year ago who just ignores it and like just takes it as gospel. Like you have to read it. Please read your outputs. Especially if it's wrong. It can be wrong sometimes. So that's really, really helpful when it comes down to learning stuff. And I'll get back to the demo in a moment, but the way that you can also kind of gut check these LLMs is if you're not sure about it, if you're not sure about the way that they're doing it, you could say, what are the other ways we could write this code? And what are the pros and cons of those approaches? Now, that's super helpful because it might just be taking the context of how you've been doing it. And if you're like, I'd consider myself like a mid-level engineer, right? Like I've only been doing this full time for 2 years. The 10 years before that was like barely coding. And in those 2 years, I've probably worked double time. So probably 4 years of coding. So mid-level, but I don't know a lot of this stuff. Like there's better ways to do things. So if it's just trained and has context of all the stuff that I'm feeding it, it's probably not aware that I want to do something in a different way. So this one's really helpful for me because case in point, when I was working last night, I was doing stuff with contexts, and that's part of why I was up so late was I did stuff without context, and then I kind of understood it. Like I get that it's not like, it's basically just like a wormhole for prop drilling, which is different from Redux. It's not actually managing state. And so I asked it a bunch of questions and it gave me pros and cons. And then I said, hey, like another tip for getting these things to help you learn is, could you explain this? Like why we're making this decision from using one context to having two contexts? Like, could you explain that decision to me like I'm your friend? And that gave me this, where it's like, you know, I asked it if I'm right. and then it said, this is what we're going to do. And I said, explain it to me like I'm your friend. And then it says, hey there, we're working on optimizing our calendar's application state management and context structure. Currently, we have a single calendar context. Like, it gives you this whole thing. And we're planning to do is split it out. This is how this file will look. This is how that file will look. By doing this separation, we're going to get X, Y, and Z. And, it gives me a way better understanding. And it's really like, it really starts to act like that actual pair programmer that's like next to you and you're having a conversation with and you're bouncing ideas off of. And I think that's where I get the most value. Like, if there's like levels to this, which there are, like level 1 would be like, I'm using this LLM and I'm spamming it. And like, I feel like everyone's on like level 1 or 2. And then as you go up the ladder, you start to treat it differently because you don't want it to atrophy your muscles on usage. Like, you still want to know how to do the thing and be competent, but you want it to press you. And you learning how to use these tools is actually its own skill set. So, then you can go deeper and you learn about Redux, whatever. But those are some of the tips. And then back to this demo, I realized okay, that's a little confusing. So then it leads me down another path. And then I started adding this stuff in. So, what's the difference between this and Google Calendar? Well, it actually creates calendars specific to activities. It has activity layers. And this is heavily influenced by a blog post that I saw. I had been thinking this. I didn't know how to call it what he called it, what this guy Julian calls it, which is a multi-layered calendar. I called it that. But what I did not call it was an activity layer. And so it's kind of this concept where it's like, look, like your time is valuable throughout the day. Like, everyone has the same amount of hours if you work from 9 to 5, but they're not all events. Like, there's something distinctly different between a Zoom call, which is like you sharing your time, it's manager schedule, and actually getting down to the brass tacks of some serious work. And so that's different from the time that you spend in the gym. That's different from the time that you spend with your spouse or with your family. And all these things need to look different. Otherwise, you're not going to want to use a calendar because it just feels like work. And so that's a big thing that I found here is, in one of the pieces of tension that I think about a lot as I'm building this product out is like, how do you make this thing feel like a video game? Like, how do you make it so when you look at this calendar, no one wants, like, it's literally a meme, like a full calendar. So that's what I'm thinking about now. And, you start with these primitives because you don't want to like reinvent the wheel from scratch day one. Like, I needed to bring in things like separate calendars for workouts and then bring in that data from Whoop and enrich it and have the graphs and all of that. And you can see these are live, right? Like, from 12:45 to 1:15. Like, what the hell was Parker doing at that time? Oops, I just realized I wasn't showing it. My bad. But that's one of the tensions is like you bring in this data and then how do you make this look more interesting? You have the live data on here. And then if I fast forward a little bit, you can see the next iteration of that was actually bringing in the tasks and the things that you need to do next. These are heavily influenced by the book by David Allen, which is called Getting Things Done. But again, like, do you want another to-do app? Well, it turns out I kind of do. Like, I want to have it all in one spot. So I'm thinking about that. And like, how do you make these next actions typed? So in TypeScript world, obviously like there's like guards around it and it has like a structure to how the data should look. I think about that with like the things that you have to do where your next action is actually like a verb. It starts with a verb and it's specific. So as I'm building out the task part of this, it's making sure that, those are actual things that you need to do. It's not like, and they're not huge. So it's not like, hey, build website. Like, you can use an LLM and have it read it and be like, yo, this is not like, we need to break this down because you'll actually get like straight up like depressed if you just write these one-liners like on a piece of paper and it's like, get like a new car or something. And it's like, yeah, well, what do I have to do in there? Like, okay, I probably need to figure out like how much am I willing to spend? Like what kind of car do I need? What color car do I need? Do I go used? Do I go leased? Do I need to research that? Like, there's all these things, right? And so that's what I think about a lot with the tasks. And then next section of it was actually notes, so making it assistive. Having the ability too, so that like this future version of yourself can actually save artifacts. So originally I was calling it coaches. I hate coach as a word. And then I had thought about doing like separate LLMs with separate models, but that's so freaking cringe. And then yeah, so that's like the gist of what I've been after. And I just wanted to like pause for a second because I know that was a lot of yapping, but I think it's important for you to know like I'm not just like this random YouTuber guy. It's not it at all. In fact, like I'm trying to reduce this down to like 40 minutes a day, but I want to give you as much value as possible. So please like just stick with me here, ask questions in the comments, let me know what I should improve on for future videos. So now we're in the code. And one of the things that I do that I found really helpful is a one-person team that's just like, you just saw the product, you understand there's a lot to it, right? Like I'm trying to replace Google Calendar, the billions of users there, trying to onboard them. I'm trying to build a better notes app, which everyone under the sun has done, but I believe it's stupid that it has to be its own thing. I think a standalone island app, like a point solution, does not work in the AI world, and it has to give you context. And have context of the other things in your life. It's also task management. It's also all this stuff, health related. So one thing in order to be able to accomplish that and be able to make progress every day is reducing the time to productivity on my actual workflow. So what I have here is this Raycast floating window. And every day when I finish a session, I write cache because our memory is similar to a computer's memory. And a lot of the way that we think is similar, right? Like we use the way that we think about our brains with the way that computers work. And when I get done with a work session, I just write like, what's the last thing that I did so that I can reduce that time to productivity so I can get up and running really quick. And so the last thing that I did at like 3 a.m. last night was I refactored these contexts to separate the UI logic, so calendar visibility and calendar data. And that is just like, bam, like, hey, dude, like, all right, like you don't have to sit here for 15 minutes and like kind of jog your memory. Like sometimes I'll put it in the file names as well, and that's pretty helpful. But yeah, so then I'll just jump in and I'll start looking around and start digging through the files and see what's up. And also I'll put a couple of other things that I need to do next. And I'll go through and I'll see, okay, well, yeah, this is what I did. I went in, I split these out, and that's great. And also, one thing that I did that I found very helpful was adding a lot of comments. And I had done this before in like a kind of non-standardized way, but one of the developers, McKay, is his name on Twitter. You should follow him too. His name's McKay Wrigley, and he got really big over like early AI stuff, like because he made a bunch of LLM projects. But he said, the number one workflow change is recently adding comments everywhere. And a lot of people might cringe, but get over it. Get over yourself. Like, oh, you should like know how to. You should know how to do it all yourself, and like code reads itself. Okay, I don't care about that. Like we're trying to get productive here, and this is an easy way to do it. Is he has this prompt, and what it does is it explains the why behind files, and it gives more context to the LLM, so that it doesn't have to spend time as like thinking and processing. It can just think of the solutions because it's just like it's got a certain amount of thought energy, of like CPU, if you will, to put to work on solutions and giving you back a query. So if you can give it more context, it doesn't have to like think about processing it and like understanding it. That's awesome. And so what I did was I basically just took that and then I went through and I used Composer, which I have a video on that, but it's like Command-Shift-I. And like 5 or 10 files at a time is really the max that I would do it. But I dropped that prompt into an AI folder called Add Comments, and I just let it rip. And I did that to all the files, and I'll tell you, it not only like one, did it make me go through my files, like all of them, and find redundancies, find dead code, stupid patterns that I hadn't looked at in a while, but it also like there's some stuff that, look, sue me, I've copy and pasted in there, or worse, just didn't even read what the LLM did. And then it made me go back and like dig into the details on it. And that was sick. So highly recommend doing that. And then the next thing that I'm doing, like I said, is I'm kind of like linking together all the stuff between the contexts and Google Calendar because I refactored the way that I'm doing things because what you saw in that demo does not have watchers. So in order to have full compatibility, if something comes in, like you book a ticket to the Creed concert, then you want that to show up and map the second that it happens. If you make a change on Google Calendar, you get an invite for Zoom, whatever. Full compatibility requires watchers. So what I've done is I basically have this pattern where I'm going in. Let's make this a little bigger. I'm going into my, let's see, lib integrations. Lib / integrations / let's just go to Google Calendar. Okay. So in here, every integration that I'm doing, this is originally a separate API, but it was overkill, is I have Google Calendar, and then for each resource, I could put this all in a class, but for me, I want to see everything in a file directory. And it's all preference, but for me, I want to do the adapter pattern, and I have a class that does the auth on all of them. And in here, I can show this because there's no invars in there, but it handles like the authorization and the refresh of the tokens and all that stuff. And then that calls a token manager, which deals with that. We have different providers. It's all typed. It's all nice. And then for each one of the methods that Google Calendar has, so like if I looked at any API, and I'm going to be working with a ton of them, if you have any questions about the Google Calendar API, I'm your boy. You have all these resources. So you have the ACL, you have the, that's access control list, all these different things. So we have a folder that matches each one of them. If there's a better pattern for this, yell at me. I don't care. But this is what I like. And then for each one of those, I have a different method. So simple method, again, they're all commented out because when I provide this to an LLM, if I needed to make a change, then, it's going to understand what's going on. I have these helpers. So that's also part of the client. So in the Google Calendar client, we have the retry, there's logging, there's a bunch of nice stuff in there. But that's the pattern that I've been using. And so the next step, like I was trying to get at earlier, was like, okay, now that we have all this, let's work through the components. So let's get what we saw earlier in the demo to work great. Let's make it fast. We need to have some interactivity, so we're going to be using hooks for that, and then we're going to be using server actions for any of the complex stuff that is not just strict queries and mutations, because I have all of those, I'm using Supabase, like I mentioned in the start of the video, where all of these, are queries. They're the reads, right? We need to get stuff. Okay, cool. Let's get stuff. Now they're all in here. And then these queries have a wrapper function on them, which deals with retries in the case that something's up. It has logging, but every single one of my queries has that helper. It's all typed. It's all nice. It's great. All the args are there. And these are the reusable things, right? So I'm not going to make any complex business logic on top of these. These are kind of just raw. And then notes, same thing. Same thing with the mutations. So you have all these mutations. And then in the next world, you use server actions, which are basically just get requests. And the server actions are up in here. And so this is now what I'm doing. Where it's okay, what server actions are required to make this? To make basically a Notion calendar, where you can drag and drop stuff. And one of the things that I've also found helpful when I was reverse engineering this is this is just a web app, right? And it's wrapped as an Electron. And so what I can do is I can go into network and let me just turn some stuff on. And I can see what's going on. I can see all the stuff. I can see, it gets user preferences. Cron. Oh, it's a webhook. Is that a web socket? I can turn on that. I can refresh the page. And I can just kind of see what's going on and dig into that and then click and see what's the response if there is one. If there's, you can basically just reverse what they're doing. So get synchronized calendars, get colors, get contact, all these gets. And so that's what I'll then, kind of use and put in my knowledge bank of okay, well, this is how it'll work. This is what I need to do. And we go from there. So I know that was a lot of stuff in one video, but look, I'm going to be making these videos. I hope it was very helpful. That's what I'm trying to do, is basically pack as much value into the video as possible on the stuff that I'm learning. Because, 6 months ago, me wish I knew this stuff now. I'm not sure what I'm going to title the video, probably day in the life, whatever, but it's much more than that. I don't want to just post a vlog with like a ukulele playing and like, like here's my new keyboard. I did show you a keyboard, but I'm trying to make it way better than that. So if you're a dev, if you're in startup world, make sure you follow along with this journey. Like the video. It makes me happy, makes me smile. Even if you hate me, especially if you hate me, definitely like the video and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.